Babies need space. Old memories don't, my daughter-in-law said while folding my sweaters into cardboard boxes like she was clearing out a guest room at a motel instead of the bedroom I had shared with my husband for 43 years. I stood frozen in the doorway, my fingers still wrapped around the coffee mug I'd been carrying downstairs only seconds earlier. The smell of fresh paint drifted through the hallway. Pale yellow. Nursery yellow. Olivia had chosen it last week without asking me. It'll make the upstairs feel brighter, she'd said with that polished smile she used whenever she wanted to disguise cruelty as practicality. Daniel stood beside the closet with his hands shoved into his pockets, staring down at the hardwood floor like it might suddenly save him from the conversation he was too weak to stop. My son was 42 years old, over 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered like his father, yet somehow he looked smaller than ever standing there beside his pregnant wife while she packed up my life one drawer at a time. I thought we could move your things downstairs before the crib arrives, Olivia continued casually. The baby really needs this room. This room. Not my room anymore. Not the room where Richard held my hand during thunderstorms because he knew I hated lightning. Not the room where we sat awake the night Daniel had his appendix removed at age 12. Not the room where my husband took his final breath 6 months ago while rain tapped softly against the windows. Just a room now. Empty space waiting for someone younger. Someone newer. I looked toward the far corner where Richard's leather reading chair used to sit. It was gone. The lamp beside it too. Even the framed photograph from our trip to Cape Cod had disappeared from the dresser. Olivia followed my eyes and smiled faintly. I moved some old things into storage already. We needed more space. Old things. The words settled into my chest heavier than grief itself. Daniel finally cleared his throat. Mom, it's only temporary until we figure things out. I almost laughed at that. Temporary. That was the same word he used when Olivia changed the locks on the garage after Richard's funeral. The same word he used when my dinner seat slowly disappeared from family nights because Olivia said climbing stairs tired me out too much. Temporary had become another word for erased. Olivia lifted one of my sweaters carefully and placed it into a box marked Nursery storage in thick black marker. I stared at the handwriting for several seconds before realizing my own name was nowhere on any of the boxes. Not Evelyn. Not Mom. Nothing. Just storage. Like I was already halfway gone. Then I noticed something else through the open bedroom door downstairs. The black metal mailbox hanging beside the front entrance. Richard had installed it himself 20 years ago. Parker Family was engraved across the front in gold lettering. But beneath it, where my smaller nameplate had once been screwed into place, there were now only 2 empty holes. Evelyn Parker was gone. Removed quietly while I slept. Olivia sealed another box with packing tape and said softly, almost cheerfully, "The nursery blueprint arrives tomorrow." I'm so excited to finally make this house feel complete. And standing there in my own bedroom, while another woman erased every trace of my life from the walls, I realized something colder than heartbreak. They weren't waiting for me to leave anymore. In their minds, I already had. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise to the sound of footsteps above my head. For a few seconds, half asleep beneath the thin blanket in the basement guest room, I forgot where I was. Then I looked at the unfamiliar beige walls, the tiny window near the ceiling, and the folding table someone had pushed beside the bed to serve as a nightstand. My room upstairs had 3 windows facing the maple trees in the backyard. Morning sunlight used to spill across the hardwood floors while Richard stood in the doorway holding 2 cups of coffee every Sunday morning. Down here, the air smelled faintly like detergent and cold concrete. I sat up slowly, my back stiff from the narrow mattress, and listened to the muffled sounds drifting from upstairs. Cabinet doors opening. Olivia laughing softly. A drill buzzing somewhere down the hallway. Renovation had started before 8 o'clock in the morning. I pulled my robe tighter around myself and climbed the basement stairs carefully, one hand resting against the rail Richard installed 15 years ago after I slipped on black ice outside the grocery store parking lot. He had spent an entire weekend reinforcing every step because he worried about me falling again someday. That was the kind of man my husband had been. Upstairs, the house barely looked familiar anymore. Plastic sheets covered parts of the hallway. Paint samples leaned against the walls. The framed family portraits that used to hang beside the staircase had vanished completely, leaving pale rectangles where sunlight had not touched the wallpaper in years. Olivia stood in the kitchen wearing cream-colored maternity leggings and holding a catalog filled with nursery furniture. "Good morning," she said brightly, though she did not look at me when she spoke. Daniel sat at the island counter scrolling through his phone while drinking coffee from Richard's favorite navy blue mug. The sight of it made something ache quietly inside me. That mug had tiny cracks near the handle because Richard used it every single morning for over 20 years. Olivia noticed my eyes drift toward it and smiled faintly. "Daniel likes using his father's things now," she said. "It makes the house feel more connected." Connected. Another polite word hiding something cruel underneath. I opened the refrigerator slowly and found my groceries pushed onto the bottom shelf behind several containers labeled baby meal prep in black marker. Even my blueberry yogurt had been shoved sideways beside raw vegetables and bottled juice cleanses Olivia ordered online. Tiny things. Small rearrangements. But after a while, small things stop feeling small. They become reminders. Proof that someone is carefully rewriting your place inside your own home 1 inch at a time. "The painters are coming at 10, Olivia announced while flipping through her catalog. "We are doing soft yellow upstairs and sage green in the nursery. It photographs beautifully in natural light." She said upstairs the way someone might say their house instead of ours. Daniel finally glanced at me then, his expression tired and uncomfortable. "Mom, maybe you should stay downstairs today while they work." Downstairs. Not because of the noise. Not because of the paint fumes. Because my presence upstairs no longer fit the future they were building. I nodded quietly and carried my yogurt downstairs without another word. Halfway back to the basement, I noticed a cardboard box sitting beside the garage door. Richard's winter coats were folded inside. His fishing hat rested on top beside the old red scarf I knitted him the year Daniel graduated high school. A white donation sticker had already been taped across the side. I stood there staring at the box for a long time while footsteps moved overhead and distant laughter echoed through the vents. Then I reached down slowly and pulled Richard's scarf into my hands. It still smelled faintly like cedarwood aftershave and cold winter air. And for the first time since Richard died, I realized something terrifying. I was not grieving my husband anymore. I was grieving the slow disappearance of my entire life. 3 days later, the upstairs hallway smelled entirely different. The scent of fresh paint had replaced the familiar traces of cedarwood, coffee, and the lavender candles I used to light every evening before Richard came home from work. I stood near the staircase holding a basket of folded laundry when I noticed the nursery door for the first time. White wood, gold handle, a tiny decorative moon hanging at eye level. Olivia had transformed my bedroom completely in less than a week. The walls were pale yellow now, soft enough to look cheerful in photographs. I knew because she had already posted pictures online before the room was even finished. That afternoon, while Daniel was at work, I sat quietly in the basement scrolling through social media on my old tablet. Olivia's newest post appeared at the top of my screen beside a smiling ultrasound picture framed in white lace. "Finally turning this house into the home our baby deserves," the caption read. Thousands of tiny hearts floated beneath the photo. Friends commenting about new beginnings. Beautiful family energy. Fresh chapter. Not one person asked where the old woman who used to live upstairs had gone. I closed the tablet slowly and stared at the basement wall for several seconds. Then I heard footsteps overhead followed by laughter drifting through the vents. Olivia was hosting guests. Again, since moving me downstairs, she had started inviting people over almost every afternoon. Pregnant friends. Interior decorators. Neighbors from 2 streets over who suddenly acted like this had always been Olivia's house. I climbed halfway upstairs quietly when I heard my name mentioned. "Honestly, she barely comes up anymore," Olivia said casually. "I think the basement setup is easier for her at her age." Soft laughter followed. Someone asked whether I minded giving up the room. Olivia paused for a second before answering in that sweet voice she used around outsiders. "It was difficult emotionally, of course. But babies change priorities. Daniel understands that now." I tightened my grip around the laundry basket. "Daniel understands that now. Not we. Not the family. Daniel. My son. The little boy who used to crawl into bed beside me after nightmares because he thought monsters lived in his closet. The child Richard coached through Little League every summer until sunset turned the baseball field orange. Somewhere along the way, my son had stopped seeing me as his mother and started seeing me as an obstacle to the life Olivia wanted. I was about to step back downstairs when another voice lowered carefully. So once the baby comes, are you still planning to renovate the basement too? There was a brief silence. Then Olivia laughed softly. No. Hopefully we will not need the basement situation much longer anyway. My stomach tightened instantly. Daniel says his mother has been struggling emotionally since Richard passed. I think eventually assisted living might actually be healthier for everyone. The words settled over me colder than winter air. Assisted living. Not because I was sick. Not because I could not care for myself. Because I was inconvenient. Because my existence interrupted the perfect family image Olivia wanted to build upstairs beside soft yellow walls and matching nursery curtains. Another woman murmured sympathetically, "That must be hard for you." Olivia sighed dramatically. "You have no idea. I just want peace before the baby arrives." Peace. As if my quiet presence downstairs somehow disturbed her happiness. I stepped back slowly before anyone noticed me standing there. My knees felt strangely weak, carrying the laundry basket back toward the basement. Halfway down the stairs, I stopped beside the storage shelves and looked toward the far corner where Richard kept his old toolbox. For months after his death, I had avoided touching anything that belonged to him. The grief hurt too much. But now something else had started replacing grief. Something colder. Sharper. I set the laundry basket down carefully and opened the metal toolbox for the first time since the funeral. Inside, beneath old receipts and rusted screws, sat a small brass key taped to an envelope with Richard's handwriting across the front. For Evelyn. Private. My hands trembled slightly as I carried the envelope back to the basement bedroom and locked the door behind me. Richard's handwriting covered the front in thick blue ink, slightly uneven near the end like his fingers had already started weakening back then. For Evelyn. Private. I sat carefully on the edge of the bed and stared at the envelope for almost a full minute before opening it. Part of me already knew whatever waited inside would change something forever. Richard had never been dramatic, never secretive. In 43 years of marriage, he handled problems quietly and prepared for things long before anyone else noticed danger approaching. That was who he had always been. The man who checked weather reports 3 times before road trips. The father who bought flashlights for every room after a thunderstorm knocked out power one winter. The husband who noticed loneliness before I ever admitted feeling it myself. Inside the envelope rested a folded letter and a second smaller key attached to a silver tag marked Hartwell Bank. I unfolded the letter slowly, careful not to tear the paper along the creases. Evelyn, if you are reading this, then things in this house have changed the way I feared they might. I stopped breathing for a second. Outside the basement window, rain tapped softly against the glass while footsteps moved faintly overhead. Richard's voice felt so alive inside those words that my chest physically hurt reading them. I warned Daniel for years that marriage only works when loyalty goes both directions. He always wanted peace more than truth. That worried me, especially after Olivia started pushing harder to control everything around her. I blinked several times, trying to steady myself. Richard had seen it too. All those moments I convinced myself I was imagining. The passive comments. The polite exclusions. The quiet rearranging of family traditions until I no longer belonged inside them. Richard had noticed every bit of it before he died. I continued reading slowly. The house is protected. I made certain of that after my second surgery when I realized time was no longer guaranteed. There are documents waiting inside the safety deposit box at Hartwell Bank. Do not tell Daniel until you fully understand what is inside. And do not let guilt convince you to surrender your place in this home. You built this family with me. Never forget that. My eyes filled with tears then, but not the helpless kind I had cried after the funeral. These tears felt different. Sharper somehow. Like grief turning into clarity. I lowered the letter into my lap and stared around the basement room. The narrow bed. The unfinished ceiling. The tiny television someone had dragged downstairs years ago during a football season. They had moved me into this space so gradually that I almost believed it happened naturally. First the upstairs room for the baby. Then the basement temporarily. Then assisted living whispered behind my back like I was already fading away. I suddenly remembered something else Richard said 6 months before he died while we sat on the back porch watching snow fall across the yard. Some people mistake kindness for surrender. He told me quietly that night. At the time, I thought he was talking about business problems with one of his former partners. Now I realized he had been talking about our own family. A loud burst of laughter echoed upstairs, followed by Olivia's voice greeting another visitor. I heard cabinet doors opening and glasses clinking together. Life continuing above me while I sat hidden downstairs reading instructions left behind by my dead husband. But for the first time in months, I no longer felt powerless. Slowly, I folded Richard's letter and slipped it back inside the envelope beside the keys. Then I stood up, walked to the small basement mirror beside the door, and looked carefully at my reflection. My silver hair needed brushing. The skin beneath my eyes looked tired from too many sleepless nights. But the woman staring back at me no longer looked erased. Upstairs, Olivia was building a nursery. Quietly, beneath her feet, Richard had already built something else entirely. The following morning, I told Olivia I had a doctor's appointment downtown. She barely looked up from her phone when I spoke. Okay, she answered distractedly while sitting at the kitchen island surrounded by fabric samples and tiny paint cards for the nursery. Daniel had already left for work an hour earlier, kissing her forehead before walking out the door without saying goodbye to me. I noticed things like that now. The small omissions. The quiet erasing of ordinary kindness. Olivia stirred almond milk into her coffee and smiled faintly at something on her screen. Just text me if you need help getting home, she said politely, the same way someone might speak to an elderly neighbor they barely knew. I nodded and grabbed my purse from the hook beside the laundry room. Inside, Richard's letter rested carefully beneath my wallet. The drive to Hartwell Bank took 20 minutes. Rain clouds hung low over the highway, turning the morning gray and colorless. I had not driven downtown alone since Richard passed away. For months afterward, even simple errands felt impossible without him sitting beside me humming softly to old jazz songs on the radio. But today felt different. My hands stayed steady on the steering wheel the entire drive. Hartwell Bank occupied an old brick building near Main Street with polished brass doors and large windows trimmed in dark green paint. Richard always liked places that looked dependable, solid, predictable, the kind of buildings meant to outlive trends and temporary people. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly like lemon polish and fresh paper. A young receptionist smiled warmly when I approached the counter. "How can I help you today?" she asked. I placed the silver key carefully on the marble surface between us. "My husband passed away 6 months ago," I said quietly. "I believe he left something for me here." Her expression softened immediately. "Of course, Mrs. Parker. Let me get Mr. Calloway for you." 10 minutes later, I sat inside a private office across from a silver-haired banker wearing thin wire glasses and a navy suit. Richard had mentioned him before over dinner conversations I barely paid attention to back then. Mr. Calloway studied the documents I brought before nodding slowly. "Your husband was very thorough," he said gently. "He arranged everything personally." Thorough. That sounded exactly like Richard. Mr. Calloway escorted me downstairs into the vault area where rows of metal safety deposit boxes lined the walls beneath bright fluorescent lights. The room felt cold enough to preserve secrets forever. He unlocked one side of the box while I inserted the brass key into the other. Then he stepped away quietly to give me privacy. Inside rested a thick manila envelope, several legal folders, and another handwritten note folded neatly on top. My throat tightened instantly seeing Richard's handwriting again. "Evelyn, if things have reached this point, then I need you to trust me completely." Beneath the note sat property documents stamped with official county seals. Trust agreements. Ownership records. Legal instructions. I turned pages slowly, my pulse growing louder in my ears with every line I read. The house did not legally belong to Daniel. It had never belonged to Daniel. Years earlier, after Richard's cancer diagnosis, he had transferred the property into a protected family trust with specific conditions attached. One sentence appeared underlined twice in blue ink. Evelyn Parker retains full lifetime residential rights to the property located at 214 Hawthorne Lane. Any attempt to remove, pressure, or involuntarily relocate her shall result in immediate forfeiture of inheritance. Rights for secondary beneficiaries. I read the sentence 3 times before fully understanding it. Then I sat back slowly in the metal chair and stared at the papers spread across the table. Upstairs at home, Olivia was decorating a nursery inside a house she thought she controlled. Daniel was probably sitting in some office downtown believing silence would keep peace inside his marriage. Neither of them realized Richard had already seen exactly who they would become long before either one of them did. When I returned home that afternoon, Olivia was standing in the driveway directing two delivery men carrying white nursery furniture through the front door. A crib, a rocking chair, shelves shaped like clouds. She looked almost radiant beneath the soft September sunlight, one hand resting protectively against her stomach while she pointed toward the staircase with cheerful authority. "Careful on the turn," she called out brightly. The walls were just painted yesterday. For a moment, neither she nor Daniel noticed me standing beside my car holding my purse and the manila envelope hidden inside it. I watched them quietly instead. Daniel carried smaller boxes behind the movers while Olivia supervised everything like the lady of the house, welcoming guests into her dream home. Then Olivia glanced toward me and smiled warmly enough for the neighbors watching from across the street. "Evelyn," she said sweetly. "Perfect timing. The nursery furniture finally arrived." I nodded politely. "It looks lovely." And strangely enough, I meant it. The crib really was beautiful. Whitewood with tiny carved stars across the railing. 20 years ago, I might have cried seeing it. Richard would have stood beside me, imagining bedtime stories and tiny footsteps running through the hallway again. But now I only felt calm. Not because the pain was gone, because the fear was. Upstairs, Olivia had transformed my old bedroom completely by evening. I passed the open doorway once while carrying towels from the dryer and barely recognized the space. The floral curtains I picked out with Richard during our 25th anniversary were gone. The antique dresser inherited from my mother had disappeared into storage. In their place stood pale furniture arranged carefully beneath framed watercolor moons and shelves lined with stuffed animals. Olivia noticed me lingering near the door and smiled proudly. "We are finally making the upstairs feel young again," she said. Young again. The phrase hung in the air for several seconds after she walked away, as if aging itself had become something shameful, something that needed hiding downstairs beside old storage boxes and forgotten furniture. That night, Olivia hosted another gathering for friends and neighbors, a small nursery celebration before the official baby shower next month. Laughter floated through the house, while soft music played upstairs. I stayed downstairs most of the evening reading Richard's documents carefully at the folding table beside my bed. Every page confirmed the same thing. The house remained legally protected under conditions neither Daniel nor Olivia understood. Richard had signed everything 3 years earlier after his second round of chemotherapy. The trust attorney's notes were clipped neatly beside each document in precise handwriting. Richard prepared this long before anyone else realized preparation would be necessary. Around 9 o'clock, I walked upstairs quietly for a glass of water and stopped near the kitchen when I heard Olivia speaking to one of her friends in the dining room. "Honestly, the basement arrangement solved everything," she whispered. "Daniel felt guilty at first, but he is finally accepting that boundaries matter once you have children." Her friend laughed softly. "You are braver than me. I could never live with my mother-in-law." Olivia lowered her voice slightly. "Trust me, this situation is temporary. Once the baby comes, Daniel will understand we need the entire house for ourselves." Entire house. Not once did she say family home anymore. Always ours. Theirs. I stood motionless beside the hallway while someone opened another bottle of sparkling cider upstairs. Then Olivia added something that made me grip the kitchen counter tightly enough for my knuckles to ache. "Besides, legally the house belongs to Daniel eventually anyway." I almost smiled. Hearing that. Not out of cruelty. Out of certainty. Upstairs, Olivia believed she was slowly taking ownership of everything around her. The walls. The rooms. The future. Meanwhile, hidden inside my purse only 20 feet away rested the documents proving she had misunderstood the foundation beneath her feet from the very beginning. 2 weeks later, the baby shower invitations arrived in pale cream envelopes tied with tiny satin ribbons. Olivia placed one beside my coffee cup early Saturday morning like she was offering peace between us. "We are keeping it elegant and intimate," she explained while adjusting fresh flowers in the kitchen. "Mostly family and close friends." I studied the invitation quietly. "Baby Parker. Welcome Little Moonbeam. Sunday at 2 o'clock. Hawthorne Lane residence. Not family home. Not Richard's house. Just the address now, stripped clean of history." Olivia noticed me reading and smiled softly. "I really hope you will come upstairs for this one. People keep asking where you have been." The sentence sounded polite enough on the surface, but underneath it rested the same quiet embarrassment she had been carrying for months. Guests noticed my absence because old women disappearing from their own homes tends to leave uncomfortable questions hanging in the air. Of course, I answered calmly. I would not miss it. Her shoulders relaxed slightly after that. She still believed silence meant surrender. The morning of the shower arrived bright and unusually warm for October. By noon, the house smelled like vanilla candles and fresh pastries. Cars lined both sides of the street, while women in soft sweaters and expensive boots carried wrapped gifts through the front door. I remained downstairs until almost 2 o'clock listening to laughter drift through the vents overhead. Every now and then I heard Olivia's voice rising above the others, cheerful and practiced like a woman performing happiness for an audience. Around 2:15, I climbed the stairs carefully carrying a small white gift bag tied with silver ribbon. Conversation quieted briefly when I entered the living room. Several guests smiled awkwardly. Others looked relieved to finally confirm I still existed. Olivia crossed the room immediately and kissed my cheek lightly. "Evelyn made it," she announced brightly. "You look wonderful." I wore the navy blue dress Richard always liked because he said it made my eyes look younger. Funny thing about grief. Eventually, you stop dressing for the dead and start dressing for your own strength instead. The nursery stood open upstairs for guests to admire throughout the afternoon. Women wandered in and out complimenting the painted walls, tiny stuffed animals, and custom rocking chair near the window. Olivia glowed every time someone praised the room. "It finally feels complete," she kept saying. "Everything is exactly where it belongs now." Daniel stayed close beside her most of the day, smiling nervously and refilling drink glasses whenever silence threatened to settle too long between conversations. I watched him carefully from across the room while guests opened presents. He looked exhausted, older somehow, like a man trying desperately to keep two different realities from colliding inside the same house. Around 3 o'clock, Olivia stood near the fireplace opening gifts while everyone gathered around applauding tiny baby clothes and stuffed bears. Then she lifted a small decorative sign from one of the boxes and laughed softly while reading it aloud. "Grandma's Nursery Rules." The room erupted with polite laughter. Someone joked that I finally got my room back after all. Olivia smiled quickly before answering. "Well, technically it belongs to the baby now." More laughter followed. Light. Harmless. But I noticed Daniel glance toward me immediately afterward. He knew. Maybe not the legal truth yet. But somewhere deep inside himself, he already understood they had crossed a line months ago. I sipped my tea quietly and set the cup down beside Richard's old oak side table. Then I reached into my purse and rested my fingers gently against the thick envelope hidden inside. Upstairs, sunlight poured through nursery curtains Olivia chose to symbolize new beginnings. Downstairs, inside my purse, rested documents powerful enough to end the fantasy she had built inside this house piece by piece. The room smelled like cinnamon candles and expensive perfume by the time Olivia opened the final gift. Tissue paper covered the living room floor, while women balanced tiny dessert plates on their knees and talked about strollers, sleep schedules, and pediatricians. Outside, the late afternoon sunlight stretched across the front windows in long golden lines, making everything inside the house look warm enough to belong in a magazine. Olivia sat in the center of it all, smiling beneath soft string lights. She insisted Daniel hang that morning. Every detail had been carefully arranged for this moment. The perfect mother-to-be. The perfect house. The perfect future. I watched quietly from Richard's old armchair near the fireplace, while Olivia held up another tiny baby outfit for applause. Then the doorbell rang. Daniel glanced toward the hallway immediately. "Are we expecting anyone else?" he asked. Olivia frowned slightly. "I do not think so." One of her friends opened the front door before anyone else could move. The conversation inside the living room softened almost instantly. A tall man in a charcoal gray suit stepped inside, holding a slim leather folder beneath one arm. I recognized him immediately. Thomas Avery, Richard's trust attorney. Daniel stood up slowly from beside the fireplace, confusion spreading across his face. "Mr. Avery?" Thomas nodded politely. "Good afternoon, Daniel." Olivia looked between them uncertainly. "Is something wrong?" she asked with a strained little laugh. Thomas turned toward me then. "Mrs. Parker asked me to stop by personally." The room became very quiet after that. I placed my teacup carefully onto the side table and stood slowly. Around us, guests exchanged uncomfortable glances while Olivia's smile faded inch by inch. "Evelyn," Daniel asked quietly. I met his eyes for the first time in weeks. "Your father left instructions," I said calmly. "Instructions I was supposed to follow if certain boundaries inside this home were ever crossed." Olivia's posture stiffened instantly. "I do not understand what this is about." Thomas opened the leather folder carefully and removed several official documents. Even the sound of paper unfolding seemed loud inside the silence. 3 years ago, he began evenly. Richard Parker established a protected residential trust regarding this property. Daniel frowned. Dad already explained the inheritance years ago. Thomas shook his head gently. Not completely. Olivia stepped closer beside Daniel now, one hand resting protectively against her stomach. "Can we maybe discuss this privately later?" she asked quickly. But Thomas continued reading. "Under the terms of the trust, Evelyn Parker retains permanent lifetime residential rights to the property located at 214 Hawthorne Lane." I saw Olivia's face change immediately. Not panic yet, just confusion beginning to crack beneath confidence. Thomas adjusted his glasses slightly before continuing. "Furthermore, any attempt to pressure, remove, relocate, or diminish Mrs. Parker's living conditions within the residence results in immediate forfeiture of inheritance rights by secondary beneficiaries." Complete silence filled the room. One of Olivia's friends slowly lowered her wine glass onto the coffee table without taking her eyes off Thomas. Daniel looked pale suddenly. "What does that mean exactly?" he asked hoarsely. Thomas closed the folder softly. "It means the house does not legally belong to you, Daniel. And if the trust determines your mother was intentionally displaced from her rightful living space, ownership transfers elsewhere entirely." Olivia stared at me like she had stopped understanding the language everyone else was speaking. "That is ridiculous," she whispered. "We never forced her out." I said nothing. I did not need to. The nursery upstairs spoke for itself. The basement bedroom. The removed nameplate. The donation boxes filled with Richard's belongings. All the quiet little erasures suddenly looked very different under legal light. Daniel sank slowly onto the edge of the sofa, both hands pressed against his knees. "Dad knew," he murmured under his breath. "He knew this would happen." Thomas looked at him carefully. "Your father understood people very well." Across the room, Olivia's carefully constructed baby shower sat frozen in place around her. The decorations, the gifts, the smiling photographs, waiting to be posted online later that evening. Everything still looked beautiful on the surface. But beneath it, the foundation she thought belonged to her had already begun collapsing. No one touched the dessert table after that. The pastel cupcakes with tiny silver stars sat untouched beneath the dining room lights while guests gathered purses and coats in stiff, uncomfortable silence. One by one, Olivia's friends offered hurried excuses before slipping out the front door without meeting anyone's eyes. The house that had felt warm and crowded an hour earlier suddenly sounded hollow again. Even the music playing softly from the kitchen speaker seemed embarrassed to still exist. Olivia stood frozen near the fireplace, clutching the edge of a gift bag so tightly the tissue paper crumpled in her hands. Her face had lost all color. Daniel remained seated on the sofa staring at the trust documents spread across the coffee table like they belonged to someone else's life. Thomas Avery gathered his papers carefully before turning toward me. "Mrs. Parker, if you need anything further, please call my office directly." I nodded once. "Thank you, Thomas." After he left, the silence inside the house deepened until even the grandfather clock near the staircase sounded too loud. Tick, tick, tick. Richard bought that clock at an antique store during our first anniversary trip to Vermont. Olivia once called it outdated and suggested replacing it with something modern. Now its steady rhythm filled the room like a reminder that some things survive longer than people expect. Finally, Daniel looked up at me. His eyes were red around the edges, not from anger, but from something heavier. "Shame, maybe." "Mom," he said quietly, "why did Dad never tell me?" I held my teacup carefully between both hands before answering. "Because your father hoped he would never need to." Olivia let out a sharp breath beside the fireplace. "So this was planned?" she asked. "You both just waited for us to make mistakes?" Her voice trembled now beneath the polished calm she usually wore so effortlessly. I looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "No, Olivia. Richard planned protection. There's a difference." She shook her head immediately. We never try to hurt you. My eyes drifted toward the staircase leading upstairs, toward the nursery built inside my old bedroom, toward the basement where my clothes had been boxed like forgotten storage. You removed my name from the mailbox, I said softly. You packed my life into cardboard boxes while I was still living here. You discussed assisted living behind my back inside my own kitchen. Daniel closed his eyes briefly after that. Olivia looked stunned for half a second before defensive anger rushed in to replace it. We were trying to make room for our baby, she snapped. Families change. Yes, I answered calmly. They do. Another long silence settled over the room. Upstairs, sunlight still glowed faintly through nursery curtains painted soft yellow for new beginnings. But downstairs, beneath all the decorations and polished appearances, the truth finally sat exposed where everyone could see it. Daniel stood slowly and walked toward the staircase. Halfway there, he stopped without turning around. Did you really think she would leave? He asked quietly to Olivia. She said nothing, because they both already knew the answer. They had not thought about where I would go. They only thought about reclaiming space, about reshaping the house into a future where old age stayed hidden downstairs until it disappeared completely. Olivia sank slowly onto the arm of the sofa, one hand pressed against her forehead, while the other rested protectively over her stomach. For the first time since Richard died, she looked young to me. Not powerful, not cruel, just frightened by consequences she never believed would arrive. I stood carefully from Richard's armchair and smoothed the wrinkles from my navy blue dress. Then I picked up the small white gift bag I brought earlier and carried it toward the staircase. Daniel turned slightly as I passed him. Mom, I paused beside the first step. The nursery upstairs is beautiful, I said quietly. But tomorrow my bedroom furniture will be moved back where it belongs. Neither of them argued. Neither of them followed me as I climbed the stairs slowly toward the room they thought had already been erased from my life. And as evening sunlight poured through the upstairs hallway, I realized something Richard understood long before I ever did. A house remembers exactly who loved it first.